Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Zero Hour. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and while everybody's attention has been focused on the so-called Cromnibus Bill, another important piece of legislation is working its way through the process on Capitol Hill. That is the authorization for the use of military force against the group which is often referred to as the Islamic State. Joining us now to talk about that is Rachel Oswald. Rachel is the national security reporter with Congressional Quarterly's CQ Roll Call, and she's been following developments there. Rachel, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So listen, the latest development, as I understand it, is that this authorization for the use of military force just passed the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. What's in it, and what, if anything, has been a bone of contention about it?
So the AUMF does restrict the U.S. military's ability to deploy ground combat troops except in certain circumstances, such as for rescuing U.S. personnel, conducting intelligence operations, and helping in the targeting of airstrikes. The measure would be good for 3 years, after which the Obama administration would have to go, or the next president would have to go back for another AUMF. And this resolution is not geographically limited. That was controversial, particularly with Senator Rand Paul, who favored making it only applicable to Iraq and Syria. Rand Paul noted that there are presently some 60 jihadi groups who have claimed some sort of affiliation with Islamic State, and they come from about 30 countries. His concern is that the current wording, which uses the term associated forces, is too broad and could be used to go into other countries such as Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Yemen, where there are groups that have claimed allegiance to Islamic State.
So, as of now, this authorization for the use of military force is directed against the ISIS group and associated groups, which could be quite broad, particularly because there's no geographic limitation. It extends for 3 years, and I believe it restricts the use of ground troops. Is that correct?
Yes.
So it does not.
Circumstances.
Now, what are those circumstances? We're talking with Rachel Oswald, a national security reporter for CQ Roll Call. What are the circumstances under which this might permit the use of ground troops?
Those could be to conduct, a small-scale rescue operation of stranded U.S. military personnel, to conduct intelligence collection operations, and to be on the ground helping in the targeting, helping collect information that can be used to target Islamic State facilities and airstrikes. Additionally, they can be on the ground if they're acting in an advisory or training capacity, which are all things that they're doing right now, as far as we know.
Okay, so I guess one of the issues of contention at one point was that, was it the administration's position that they didn't want these restrictions written into the bill?
Yes, Secretary of State was here a couple days ago, and he said that while he reaffirmed that President Obama definitely does not want to open another large land war in the Middle East, they are concerned that there could be contingencies where they might need to send in ground troops, so they weren't comfortable with any kind of restrictive language being placed on them.
Now, about this restrictive language, is it in any way controversial with those who don't want to see ground troops committed into combat? For example, does anybody fear that these advisors and intelligence forces and so on might be, that forces might be introduced into combat, as happened, some believe, in Vietnam and elsewhere, that they might be introduced into combat roles while being described this way?
Right. So I should first preface this remark that I haven't actually got a copy of the final resolution that was passed. I had an earlier version. I'm expecting the complete version later today. Actually, as funny as it was, Senator Bob Corker was the one who accused the Obama administration of incrementalism with its framing of the way it wants AUMF, because he said he was concerned that because the Obama administration, in his opinion, has not described a very clear and detailed strategy, that they could end up in another repeat Vietnam scenario.
Now, Rachel Oswald of CQ Roll Call, I don't want to put you in an awkward spot, but Somehow this feels a little bit like role reversal, that we have Republicans expressing skepticism, worry and fear about getting drawn into deeper military intervention, and a Democratic administration insisting that it needs these powers and these capabilities. Doesn't that seem like a bit of a reversal from, say, 10 years ago?
It does, but I would add there are a couple of positions on this. You had many Democrats on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee who wanted to have an even stricter AUMF than the one that passed. They were actually siding with Rand Paul, a number of them, in voting in favor of geographic limitations, and there was a separate amendment which failed that would have only approved a one-year AUMF authorization. So you've got Democrats that are to the left of Obama, and then you've got people like Rand Paul, a libertarian, who are also to the left. And then you've got senators such as Bob Corker and Marco Rubio, who are to the right of the administration, and say that the U.S. should be open to the use of many ground troops if it calls for it. Though, of course, all senators, no one is saying that they want another third Middle East war. But the Republicans, for the most part, are saying we should be prepared for whatever.
Now, whatever is probably what we're likely to get. We're talking with Rachel Oswald, national security reporter for CQ Roll Call. Quick parenthetical question, Rachel. Given the process you describe, has it been kind of fun in a way to? I mean, it's a deadly grim subject, but has it been kind of exciting to cover the ins and outs, the odd alliances that have been forming, and so on here?
I gotta say, there's a lot of partisan politics and gimmicks and people having their angles, trying to position themselves, and it's not about the policy. I've actually somewhat enjoyed these last couple of days of coverage because I sat in on really substantive, meaty debates about constitutional responsibilities, the separation of powers. Senators are having, really serious discussions about what it means to go to war and how you should go to war if you do decide to go to war.
Well, that's an interesting response. We're talking with Rachel Oswald of CQ Roll Call. In other words, you're saying it's been interesting, but not because of the machinations or the ins and outs, but because there actually is on both sides of the aisle some really substantive discussion going on about what it means and the implications of this decision, right?
I would agree. I would say there's a strong sentiment, at least on the Foreign Relations panel, that they don't want to repeat what they did in 2001, where they approved a very broad 2001 AUMF to go against the perpetrators of the 9/11 attacks, and that AUMF has since been used for all sorts of operations that the original writers of that resolution did not anticipate. So they don't want to do that. They want to do a better job.
Very, very interesting. So what happens now? Where does this AUMF go from here, and what are people expecting?
Well, it's not going anywhere. This was largely an exercise in grandstanding, and I know that sounds really cynical, but everybody knows that there's not simply enough time for a Senate floor debate before Congress adjourns this year. So what will likely happen is that this resolution will die, and then when the Republicans take power in January, they'll craft a resolution more to their own liking and also probably to the administration's liking, because the administration has said they don't want a limitation on the use of ground forces. And it'll be that resolution that'll be the one that'll get serious consideration.
So if this is going away, if there's going to be a different one next year, your biggest expectation would be that, in other words, this was more of a rhetorical debate, and that next year there may be an authorization that is in some way broader or some way more restrictive. Well,
I would say it gives the administration more power. It may not include any requirement to sunset the provision after 3 years, as the Democratic-supported one did, and it would likely not forbid the administration to use ground troops as the administration sees fit. But it could be targeted in the language it used. A number of Republicans were concerned, particularly Rand Paul, were concerned about the associated forces thing, and were concerned that it didn't target enough Islamic State individuals.
Last question for you, Rachel Oswald, national security reporter with CQ Roll Call. It's slightly parenthetical. This is a fascinating story, and I'm glad you came to discuss it with us. But there's movement afoot to stop referring to this group as ISIS or the Islamic State and refer to them as Daesh, which Secretary Kerry himself did earlier this week. Are you familiar with that? And if so, do you agree with that?
Well, speaking, purely for myself and not for my employer, I see why people want to do that, because a number of Muslims, a number of Arabs who oppose ISIS say that having Islamic State in the title, kind of validates them, and they are asserting that there is absolutely nothing Islamic about what they are doing. So they don't want to, I guess, play their hand by calling them Islamic State, because again, ISIS is also declared a caliphate, that they have their own nation state. So they don't want to reward ISIS by using the name ISIS prefers.
Well, and speaking for myself personally, it makes sense since, as our president has said, it is neither Islamic nor a state. But in any event, fascinating story. I know you'll stay on it. I hope you'll come speak with us again. Rachel Oswald, national security reporter for CQ Roll Call. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and we will be right back after this. This is the Zero Hour.